What we'll do today is we'll review some of the stuff I went over last week, which is just essentially starting at the very beginning. What are we doing? Starting with the submission from the back and then building forward from there. And today we're going to look a little more at what are the defenses you're probably going to run into, like a simple form of defense, how to beat it, and then a little bit more dynamic form of defense and how to beat that. And then that'll probably be more than enough for today. So now that I've finished that sentence, it's probably about time for me to repeat it all again. Um, so just to give a little bit of context, I didn't really get into this too much last week, but you could have. There's a couple different approaches people will take when it comes to teaching jiu-jitsu. I would say generally the most common one is to teach some form of defense first, bridging to escape from the mount, hip escapes in some form or another. And there are definitely good reasons for that. Probably the biggest one is when you're first starting out, you're going to be mounted a lot. You're going to be under the side control a lot. You don't really have any choice in that. So you kind of want to have some idea of what to do. Even if it doesn't really resolve successfully every time, you at least have some sense of direction and you're not just flailing around the entire time you're sparring. That's a totally fine way to go about things. I like to take sort of the opposite approach where I want you to sort of understand, okay, what is the best case scenario for me? How am I going to win against somebody who's got 10 years of experience on me? What would that require? And frankly, it's getting to their back and employing some form of strangle. And so I like to think of it like you're trying to go through a maze, and you could start at the beginning of the maze and sort of find all the routes that don't resolve, and then eventually find the end. Or you can start at the finish line and sort of trace your way backwards to the start. And so that's what we're doing now. I also think it helps students to have a strong vision for themselves going forward when they say, oh wow, I just learned how to do this strangle today. I could sense that there's something pretty effective about it potentially. Maybe I don't have it perfect, but there's something here. And maybe this is worth me studying a bit more, practicing a bit more, and then that sort of helps them build the initial momentum for their study and for their practice. So the first thing we're going to do is just review the initial grip from the back, rear naked strangle, so without the gi, and then lapel strangle with the gi. And then we'll put the hooks in and we'll start to go through some of the defenses you can expect and how to overcome those. Okay, so if I've got Emmy here and she's kneeling in front of me, the first thing we always do is we take our dominant hand, and we're going to take it and bring it over our partner's shoulder. We're going to take our non-dominant hand and go underneath. This will be my strangle hand, my dominant hand, and this will be my support hand, the one that goes underneath the arm. Now, it's important that when I come in, I do want to join my hands together, but joining my hands together is really just to keep my elbows in a particular position. So it's no good to come in and get a grip where you're like this at a distance. You want to make sure you go sternum to spine, making contact here. Then I go around with my grip and I make contact with the front of her shoulder using my elbow here. Then I lock my hands together. When I lock my hands, I want to cover up the pinky knuckle of my dominant hand with the pinky knuckle of my support hand, so that essentially my strangle hand has no edges to it. There's nothing to grab onto. So I'm like this. We're never here. We're never grabbing just a part of our hand, but we try to completely cover that hand and place it close to the armpit. The other part of this is my head trap, where I'm using either my ear or the back of my head to sandwich Emmy between my grip and my head position. And this will more or less constitute the upper body grip that we take when we first come in. So again, the major cues here are going to be sternum to spine, elbow on the front of the shoulder. We join the hands together to solidify that elbow position, and then my head trap is in place. Okay? And so you can obviously run that grip a couple of times. It's not that difficult to get into. The thing that we want to have as a sort of habit between me and my training partner is that as soon as my grip resolves on her, her defensive grip will come into play at the same time. So I come in with my grip here, and Emmy will come in with a defensive grip, one, and then a supporting grip that goes on top of that. And so I'll go over what she's doing right here, right now. So what Emmy's looking to do is to take the webbing of her hand between the thumb and first finger of her left hand, and she's trying to grab onto the thumb line of my right hand. She would love it to be able to do, hypothetically, she would love it if she could be able to grab this grip right here, right? This is the most powerful and reliable defensive grip for her. So there's an initial battle where I'm trying to cover that spot up and she's trying to wedge her thumb in there. Now, she also has a thumb line on her left arm, and so her right hand comes in to cover up her thumb line. Okay, and so there's this sort of battle that's going on where we both want access to the thumb line, which is just that line that goes from your wrist all the way to the end of your thumb. Because that's really where grips get peeled off and stripped within the confines of the rules of jiu-jitsu. So I know that, and she knows that. I come in, I get my grip, she takes a defensive grip, and a lot of how this plays out is going to come down to who knows how to make the most out of this position, who knows how to strip grips away, who ends up making mistakes, things like this, and a lot of our attacks and defense are built on that. Okay, so that's just a seatbelt grip on my end and a defensive grip on her end. Okay, now let's imagine a scenario where I get my offensive grip and for whatever reason I just blow past her defensive grip. It doesn't even come into play, and so I'm able to go into one of two forms of strangle and finish. What would that look like? Let's try and blow this way. So we come in, I've got my initial grip, and she's just asleep at the wheel. She does no defensive grip. One thing I'm always looking to do at this point is to take my right hand, my dominant hand, and to hide my thumb line either at her shoulder blade, okay, or behind her head, which is best. Either way, if I go to her shoulder or I go to the back of her head, I want to squish my own thumb with my head now. So that even though I've only got one hand involved here, if Emmy reaches up with two hands and tries to pull my arm down, get to my thumb line, all that stuff, it's not really going to happen. Okay? It's no good to get this grip and sort of pull your own head back, leave that thumb line exposed, and it's gone. Okay? So that's our first thing. If she has no defensive grip, for whatever reason, I want to get my hand into a position where I can cover my thumb with my head instead of with my hand. So we go grip. She doesn't have any defensive grip, no problem. I go either shoulder or behind the head, and then I cover all that up. Now my support hand leaves, and usually what I'm going to do is take it and use it like a frame in her back here. So I push forward with my left, and then I join my hands together in a hand-to-hand grip. Yeah, and this grip is just, I put my thumb and my fingers together, I put my palms together, and then I fold it all over. Okay. Often this is called a gable grip. This is a totally fine way to finish the strangle. It's not the best grip in the world, but don't think you're not going to finish people with it. So again, we get our initial grip here. No defensive hands, great. I go around and I cover up. My left arm works like a frame. I go hand to hand. And now here's the key transition if I'm going to go for rear naked. It's very important I don't go back with my head and try to form the finishing grip. And it's important that I don't stick my hand forward here and give up my thumb line on the support arm. Instead, I'm going to curl my left fingers and wrist back towards me. So it's almost like a snake, and it's constantly going over my thumb line so that I cross wrists. Okay? The cue that I would use is my elbow on my left arm is going to go from behind her shoulder to in front of her shoulder, just like my right arm is. Okay, so now I've got two elbows in front of her shoulders here. Now I finger crawl until I'm wrist deep with the strangle hand. I finger crawl until I'm wrist deep with the support hand over here. And my support hand is actually grabbing towards my own armpit. We don't go palm on the back of the head. Okay. You go in, everything's locked up. Finger crawl, finger crawl. Now when it's time to finish, I'm going to fold her forward and I'm going to rotate into the ground for the finish. Okay. Now, from my perspective, from Em's perspective, obviously she can sort of feel what's going on here. It shouldn't take a lot for me to get the finish. If we're thinking about turning up the volume on the strangle, I should be able to turn that volume up to 3 and she's already tapping. Yeah. It's also important just to keep in mind, because sometimes people lose track of this, I want to allow for her to tell me when she's done and she wants to have me let go of the submission. It's really easy to be kind of timid at the beginning. Think you're going to hurt your training partner. I know, Scott, you don't have this fear at all. But you'd be surprised. A lot of times people, they do the strangle, they think the person's just going to explode in their hands or something like this. But allow the strangle to come on, allow your partner to tap. It really helps you sort of calibrate what it takes to put somebody out, and it lets them know sort of what the limit is on the strangle. Okay, so I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to keep doing the submission until she taps. So we come in initial grip. She doesn't have a defensive grip. Perfect. I go straight away to my thumb behind her head. I make sure to cover all that up. Then I go with a frame in her back, hand to hand. From hand to hand, I'm going to snake my wrists over each other so that I've now got 2 elbows on the front of her shoulders. We finger crawl one, finger crawl the other, and now I fold her up with my elbows and rotate everything in the direction of my strangle arm. And now we get a nice finish. And if you're ever wondering, always remember, if your partner has a little bit of a bloodshot eyes afterward, you know you had a good blood strangle. If they're sort of like, then maybe you were on the trachea. No good.
Do you, or question, it's just us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I've actually never seen the little, hand grip behind the neck before. That's nice. But I was going to ask you, are you cinching the elbows slowly and pulling in, or are you going forward on, when you're cinching down?
Yeah, so most of the effort is going to be on folding the person forward with your elbows, and then 2, turning them like you're rotating to the floor. It should feel like you're using a wrench to loosen a bolt, where right before it goes, you get that torque. That's what we're looking for here. It's not a squeeze like a pair of scissors. It's a turning rotation like I'm using a wrench or like I'm turning a doorknob. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Yeah, a good test for that is actually to try and finish with just one hand.
Yeah.
Right? With the hand behind the head. Because you'll have to use the elbow, you'll have to make that turn, and then you know you're on the right track. I'm going to go over the collar strangle now, and you can trade off between the two. But you'll want to have the rear naked strangle as something you can just summon up whenever you need it. And then when you have a jacket on, it's generally a little bit easier to finish with the lapels, both just because of the way it allows your hands to hold on, and because you don't have to get your hands and elbows into a perfect position. You just have to get your hands into a pretty optimal position. So there's some upsides to it, but definitely rear naked strangle is something to master. With that said, let's look at the collar strangle from the same sort of setup and really just point out some of the main differences between the two, because a lot of the similarities will be fairly obvious. Okay, so it's the same start here, same initial grip, same assumption that I'm able to get my strangle hand into play. Okay, now there's a lot of different techniques we can use to get a good strangle grip. You can pull the lapel, you can fold it, but I'm just going to give you a couple cues to let you know if you're on the right track. A good one is that when I take the grip in the lapel, I want to be able to move my head back and see my index knuckle. Okay, it doesn't have to be just absolutely like plumbing the depths of the ocean deep, but I can't be in a position where I can't see my index knuckle. Okay, and this is going to be important for this in particular, because when we finish the collar strangle, it's actually important that my grip is twisting so that I can throw my head away from the grip. That's one of the main differences between using lapels and not using lapels. So when I use the lapels, my head will end up moving very far away from my grip, whereas with the rear naked, we're always going to be crowding with the head. Okay, so we'll get into more of the finer details of lapel strangles another time, but the general insight here is that we get our grip, we find the lapel a lot of times either by folding or pulling the slack out going down, and then we grab an initial grip and we improve from a junk grip into our actual strangle grip. So
keep on 4 fingers, just to be clear, because I know some I've learned 2 times, 3 fingers.
That's actually a fantastic point. You should be able to complete this with just the index finger and thumb.
Yeah.
Adding middle finger is better, ring finger better still. The pinky finger actually can sort of get in your way. You'll see this also in standing position, where this pinky finger, it's not necessary to have in the grip. And as a test, kind of like using the one-handed strangle, I should be able to get my partner to tap with just the index and thumb.
Yeah, that's how I learned 1 or 2. So
yeah, and a lot of times, sort of like in the back and forth of sparring, your grip may start in one form and sort of come apart to some degree. But as long as you've got that first finger and thumb, you're fine.
Okay.
Now another thing to keep in mind here is we've got our initial grip here. We've made it into what I call a junk grip. This just means my hand is holding the lapel. Because if my hand is not holding anything, the hand fight is way harder for me to win. So I always like to come in, get an initial junk grip to start things off, and then I improve that grip until I'm in the position I'm going to use to strangle. So it's not a matter of, okay, there's my final grip. It's controlling grip, junk grip, feed it up until you've got a finishing grip. Now again, there's a lot of variations on how to finish. The simplest one is the sliding collar strangle, where I just grab this remaining lapel. I pull that second lapel down as I try to pull my elbow behind her shoulder blade. Okay, so one goes down, one pulls behind the shoulder blade. I move my head away and I let my partner tell me when to stop. And that's that.
It gets kind of fast,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. Especially when you've got the hooks in and you're able to get an angle on them and really throw your body weight into it. You can get a lot of turning force with that attack. So we've got just a quick recap of the rear naked strangle and the sliding collar strangle from the back. I know I'm kind of like blowing right through them, but any initial questions on them? One thing because there's always this balance that we have to strike where it's, there's this notion of the absolutely perfect mechanics for a technique, and then there's the reality of what's required to beat that person you're sparring with. And there's always this sort of balance where if I beat that other person, what I don't want to do is go, oh, so therefore I did everything right. So you did it correct enough to overcome their correct enough, and you sort of match up in that way. But I should always be able to ask some question that would improve what I just did, and at the same time realize if I just try to do the absolutely perfect technique, I'm going to be stuck on step one, and they're just blowing past my guard and they're attacking me, right? So there's always this balance that like it's tough to manifest every moment of jiu-jitsu. But as long as we recognize when we practice each one, you're fine. In drilling like what we're doing, you can take your time to get those grips perfect, and I'll show you a couple things about how to test each individual position. And then in sparring, it's, okay, the sweep, maybe I could have done that a little bit better, but did I actually knock them down and get up? If so, that's a sweep, and that's good enough for now. And then we can revisit it and improve it, right? So always having that balance in mind is great, and never be discouraged by the lack of mechanical perfection or the fact that you still have lots of questions. Those are perfectly natural scenarios, and it's eternally the sort of balance we have to strike in jiu-jitsu, right?
West.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed you said you pull your head away when you do the slide.
Yeah.
Is there, because it's creating distance, your elbow's cranking around, disappearing, correct? Like your arm is disappearing around her.
Yeah, so
back.
My head will move away, but I want my elbow as close to my hip as possible when that happens.
Tucking it like around?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my head as far away as possible, but never at the expense of my elbow staying behind. Right, and that's sort of how you balance out all those variables is to just keep the elbow as close as possible, but do let your head move away. Don't think you got to keep it super close. Okay. Let's look at the same collar strangle, but we're going to look at it now with hooks. We're going to go over one sort of simple defense that you're going to run into just thousands and thousands of times, and then a little bit more sophisticated when your partner is alert to the first strategy. Okay, so if I've got Amy's back here, and we're working with hooks in here. Now, the first thing, just a couple words on hooks is we don't want to get in the habit of hooking with shoelaces like this. That's not the idea. We want to put the knees in front of the torso as much as possible. Then they go together, and I pull my heels towards my butt here. Okay, so I'm really using my hamstrings to hold her in position. Now we take our seatbelt grip, and then we would generally, I recommend you fall towards the underside arm. There are times and reasons to go the other way, but for our purposes, we're going to go to this side. And first, we're going to scoot a little bit this way. And what we're really looking to do is go from a position where we're more or less parallel, our spines are more or less lined up, to one where I'm sort of perpendicular to her, sort of across her back. Okay, so that might look something like this. We go to the side, we land here, and I want to place a hook like this, and you'll see that I've started to offset my spine in regards to hers. Okay, I've taken my bottom hook and I've placed it all the way across her hip here, and this one hook is now going to control her two legs. When I'm in this position, my right leg can do a couple of things. Worst case, it'll step on my own foot. If my partner's sort of generously built or a lot larger than me, like you and Kai might have to do this position here. But if you ever can, just lock a body triangle.
Yeah.
Very hard to go wrong with a body triangle. People are going to try and step this foot over and do this kind of thing to your leg. Don't be scared. I'll go the other way. Yeah, don't be scared of this sort of thing. If you ever feel pressure like this, just release and push their head forward. Okay, and they'll never be able to finish you like this. They won't even be able to finish you if you do the terrible, terrible mistake of cross your ankles in front like this. I'm not going to encourage you guys to do this, but there's a way to get out of it if you ever mess up. I saw somebody lose the brown belt world championships with that mistake. Totally not necessary. Body triangle when possible. Foot to foot if you can't fit that around. Okay, so that's our general.
Are you on the heel, or are you just trying to
I'm trying to fit the arch of my right foot into my left. So the heel of my left foot meets the arch of my right foot. Just so there's no break in the contact there. Okay.
So it's like a support or like a structure or frame or something?
Yeah, I just don't want to have this sort of open circuit here where her leg can potentially pass through, and all kinds of madness starts to happen. I want to have that contact that I know, as long as they're in contact, she's not going through that exit door, right? And the body triangle sort of doubles up on that. Yeah. If you can, sometimes you'll be able to hike the body triangle up high, and you can really just torture them and crush their lungs with this sort of thing. But if possible, body triangle, best, minimum, we step on the foot here. Okay? Now, the simplest defense we can assume is I've got my grip, and Emmy, she goes in and she puts her defensive hand in, and she puts that second supporting hand in. Now, if Emmy's sort of not as familiar with how this all can play out, you'd be surprised at how often you can just directly trap their arm. And what I mean is I've got this free leg here, and what I'm looking to do is to get her hand lower than her chest. Now, she's grabbing my hand right now, so if I just move my hand down, her hand goes with it. And you will be amazed at how often somebody just follows your hand like this. So you just open your knee, I aim my heel at my thumb, and I know her hand's going to be involved in there somewhere. I don't go searching for her hand, who knows where that went. I just go my heel to my thumb, and I step down like I'm stepping up a staircase, and then I scrape her arm behind her back, shoelaces on the spine. Okay? Now I've gotten rid of one of her arms. Then she's got one hand left against my two hands here. But the thing is now her thumb line is exposed. So what I'm going to do is make sure I can see that thumb line. I go over the top, and I peel her hand forward with my left hand against her left, while I pull my right hand back and behind her ear. Okay, just like pulling a knife out of a sheath. 1, 2. Now I want to keep her hand glued to her chest. So a lot of times when you're in this position, if the person is just flailing around wildly, I just wanted to see what happened right there. If they're really trying to get this hand free because they know how important it is, they're going to try to get you to do something like that. Yeah. And you see how the break in the grip is where my thumb meets my fingers. I always want that opening to be pointed at her, and never just sort of at open air like this where she can punch out and escape her hand. Okay, so once I've got my left over her left, we're going to forward throttle and just keep it on her chest here. And then we would go back to what we were doing before, where we've got our head trap. She'll probably have her chin down at this point because it's really the only defense she has. Make that politician hand, we go behind the ear, we dig in with whatever word it is we're going to use, and we move forward for the finish. Okay? Again, I'll go over these a few times, not just today, but going forward, so we can really dig into those pieces. But what I want to communicate today is, here's what you should expect as like a minimum defense. No one's going to get their back taken and just be like, okay, just strangle me, this would be great. They're going to do something like this. They're going to try to grab something. And a lot of times it's because you're behind the person. It's very hard for them to keep track of everything that's going on. And so they'll just let their hands drift down. And if I had to estimate, it's like 60, 70% of the time against other black belts. If you're putting a lot of heat on them from the back, you will just be able to drop their hand down and hook your leg over. And then it's basically game over because it's a 2 hands versus 1 hand fight. Right? So I'll do that again, but this would be our sort of simple defense that we can expect when we just directly trap the arm. Okay, so we've got our hooks in. We're always making sure to put knees forward, heels to butt. Seatbelt grip goes in. Good rule of thumb is we go towards the underside. I place my legs, whether it's body triangle or foot over foot, and let's say I'm grabbing my strangle hand here, and she's letting me guide her hand. So I guide her hand below her own chest, my knee goes open, and my heel goes towards my own thumb. I step until I remove one of her hands. Now I just take her thumb, I strip her grip, throttling forward and pulling my hand behind her ear, and then we start digging in for whatever finish we're looking for. Okay? So pretty simple, pretty direct, but you can probably see already that just a little bit of awareness on Emmy's part would start to undermine that offensive strategy. One thing she might do is, instead of letting me guide her hand to where I want it and then trapping her arm, is that as she detects that happening, she just lets go and stays around her own neck and just sort of stays around that perimeter and doesn't let me bring her hands low. Okay, and then this is where we start to get into a little bit more of an involved hand fighting game. So in order to make this a little more comprehensible, I'm just going to go over some of the grips to encounter and what you really are looking for, best case scenario. So if I've got him back here, the best grips for me to get are what are called double cross grips, where I've got her in basically a straight jacket. My right holding her left, my left holding her right.
Okay. Are you half on the wrist, half on the hand, so she can't flex her hands at all?
There's going to be a couple of cues you can use. In a double cross grip, a lot of times think of it like a rope and a knot, where you're just going to slide down and you're going to catch about half and half. Okay. But I wouldn't be too committed to that exact measure. What you want to do is make sure that you can touch your own thumb and finger together, wherever that can happen.
Circle grip, right?
Yeah, that's going to be the best for you.
Okay.
The thing about double cross grips or even a single cross grip is you'll see it allows me to use my elbow like I was before. So if Em tries to turn to her left here, that elbow is going to stop her. And if she tries to turn to her right, my arm is going to block her. Okay? This is as opposed to a straight grip like this, where it's difficult for her to turn one way, but it's not difficult for her to turn the other way. Okay? So if we had like a hierarchy of grips from most desirable and useful to least, it would be double cross grip is the best, single cross grip, either form, and then double straight grips. Okay, and that's really the only tricky part of it is double straight, not as good as single cross. You can think of this as gift wrap or whatever form of this you're familiar with. Single cross grip is always better than double straight grips. And then of course we've got single straight on one side and single straight on the other. Okay, so if you hear me talking about straight grips, you know what I'm talking about. And if you hear me referencing cross grips, you know what I'm talking about. Now, coming at it from the same perspective as before, we come in, we do our usual things, actually, where we're going towards the underside, and we start forming our leg position, and I start trying to directly trap the arm here, but Emmy releases my hand, and she just starts swimming inside and trying to protect by her ears or crossing her hands like this. You're going to run into different things like this. The main thing that you want to observe is that she's not letting you move her hands directly where you want. She's letting go and staying in this sort of territory. Okay, so if I've got my seatbelt grip, she's got her defensive grip. Now, I start trying to track her hands down, not happening for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and I'm going to push with my right hand, whatever hand is over by her ear. Okay, since it's her left hand right now, I push it down and I get a straight grip. If it had been her right hand, I push it down and I trap the arm. Okay, but the big takeaway is my right hand is going to address whatever's on this right side. It could be her right, goes below her chest. There's that arm trap we're looking for. If it's her left, no problem. I grab all four fingers. We can't grab individual fingers. I grab all four fingers and push, and I use what's called a backhand frame, where I fold my wrist back and then grab her hand and I punch it into her chest here. Okay. Once I've got this grip here, I pull my right hand back, and her right hand absolutely has to come up and address my hand. So here's where it can get a little bit tricky. I've got a straight grip. I've got my right hand working. I'm going to push her right hand down and give that to my left hand, because now I've just moved up that hierarchy we just talked about. I've got a single cross grip. You see here, I've got this single cross grip working, whereas a moment ago, whereas a moment ago, I had a single straight grip. Okay, so I've improved a little bit. This single cross grip, now Emmy's in a problematic situation. If she only addresses my right hand, no problem. We trap the arm, we double up on this hand, and now where we want to be, uncontested hand to go to the neck. Okay. If I've got this single grip and she starts fussing around trying to free her own hand, I just pluck her hand off, and now I've got double cross. I'm in the best situation I could be. I keep punching this hand below her chest, trap, hand off, and we're ready to go. So I'm happy to go over all that again, but there's there's so many things you could do when you're on someone's back. But this is more or less what you're trying to accomplish. Get your legs situated in something that's like a body triangle. If it's not exactly a body triangle, it's close to it. Then you engage in this hand fight. And you know that some of the parts of the hand fight are preferable to some of the other options. Best of all is double cross, then single cross, then double straight, and single straight. And so when you're working, you can always just sort of look at the scenario you're in and go, okay, well, what's available here? Is there a single cross? Is there a way to feed this into a double cross? If I can do that, then I'm on my way. So I'll go over this again, and I'll just point out some of the major milestones that we're working through, and then we'll see where we're at. Okay, so I'm here with them, got it back, and we place our hooks in, we get our seatbelt grip, we go off to the side here, and Emma does a good job of initially placing her hands. I always first will place my legs in whatever position I'm going to work from, and then I start addressing her hand position. Now, if I could, if she was following my right hand and just let me punch everything down, I would directly trap her arm. But she's hip to that, she's seen all that before, so instead of just letting me track her hand down, she goes back up to her neck, and now I've got to see what kind of hand fight I can win here. I'm always going to take my right hand, and I'm going to grab whatever is by her right ear. I grab all 4 fingers and push forward. Then I do a pass off, and now I've got a single straight grip. It's a 1 versus 1 fight now, and I punch that hand down. Once it's below her chest, my heel finds my thumb, and we get the trap we're looking for, and we can finish. Okay. In the other situation, she's got her defensive hands in here. She doesn't let me track her hands down. She goes up towards her ears with her hands here. Now in this situation, I'm always going to look to grab whatever's by her right ear. This time I punch it down, and I pass it off until I've got that cross grip. Again, if her hand goes below her chest, I'm just going to go ahead and trap her arm. So I expect her free hand to go to try to address her trapped hand. And now I just go over the top and I just pluck this hand back and behind her ear. And then I go back to what I was doing all along, which is to trap her arm. Use a little bit of a pass off here. Oh, and one little tip here is try not to do your pass off where you've got your right hand holding on and you just go and you hope that you'll catch their hand in there. You're never gonna, their hand's gonna be on Mars by the time you get around to it. I've got one, I really secure the left, and I sort of crush their hand. I mean, I've got kind of big hands, so I can do this to a lot of folks, but I try to make their hand as small as possible while I get my left hand in position and I go up their hand. So I've got the grip. I don't just like throw it to my left hand like this. I've got my grip and I really feed and I take my time here because it's a 2-on-1. I've got as long as I want to do this. And I really feed and I make sure that the weakness of my grip is pointed at her chest, never at open space like this. Okay, now that I've got this secure, I've got this secure, then we can start working on our strangle or our tickle attack or whatever it is we're going to do. Okay, Kai, you might be familiar with tickle attack. That's a really horrible attack to be under the stress of.
He's crazy.
There's two kinds of people.
I'm like, I've never met a kid like that. I've never met a kid like that.
Oh, now I've got your attention, huh? Now you're interested. Okay. But does that sort of make sense so far?
Yeah.